Oh,
You're gonna die.
What are you?
oh
my
God.
Oh my.
Now, obviously, that's not what every single Challenger play looks like, but you might have wondered what it takes to even get Challenger in League of Legends in the first place requires, or for that matter, what it takes to get really good at anything you're doing. Doesn't really matter what it is, just a level of being extremely, extremely good at it. Now, there are some things that it requires, and I won't be going over these because these are sort of obvious, hopefully. A little bit of time, obviously. It takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of knowing the basics. So in this case, for League of Legends, you have to know like the basics of what each champion does, sort of. You have to know some of their abilities. You have to know your abilities and that sort of thing. But there is one thing that isn't talked about too often. And it's because it's uncomfortable. And honestly, it's not, for that matter, even enjoyable unless you end up untraining your brain. And what do I mean by this? Well, you have to do something that 99% of others are not willing to do. And it's actually what separates the 1% from the 99% of people in, for that matter, everything. It doesn't really matter what it is. In fact, I would probably argue it's more so the top 0.1% or the best of the best of the best, but not the top 1%. But regardless, if you want to be in that top 1% of anything that you do, or even maybe higher, top 0.1%, you need to do one main thing. And that is learn from your mistakes. Now, that's otherwise known as cognitive flexibility. Now, I could do an entire video, for that matter, on how video games actually make you smarter than the average person by a huge margin, especially if you play at a competitive level, which is kind of actually bad to be very smart in some cases, but that's a completely different video in and of itself again. So now becoming smarter, like genius level, in my opinion, genius level smart without being born like that, I think can be done. But I think that it's only done at an extremely competitive level. And in this case, when you're playing video games like I am. Now, you can do this a couple other ways, but I don't really think it applies to them as often. One of them could be being a race car driver. It could be being the very, very, very best of the NBA, by the way. I'm not just talking about a regular NBA player. I mean the best of the best of the best of the best. And even then, I don't think it necessarily applies too much to them. And it has more so to do with their physical ability playing more of an important role and their height rather than actual brain capacity, but that's besides the point. Now, this is because when you play at an extremely high level of anything and you are the best of the best, you have to be willing to not only accept when you are wrong, you have to also be willing to accept the mistakes that can be improved and the ones that you made. Now, this is really challenging, and it forces your mind to rethink things through everything, for that matter, because you're doing it wrong. Now, this might not sound so hard at first, but trust me, when you put your mind to it and you actually put your mind to the test, it will not work for 99% of people almost instantly. And it's because their brain has been trained incorrectly. And in fact, I was in that 99% originally, for that matter. And it's because you've been training your brain and your brain has been conditioned incorrectly. And this usually has to do with education and environment. I'm not going to be explaining that, but basically you've taught your brain incorrectly, and because of that, when you try to introduce a certain sort of thing like League of Legends or something extremely competitive and that sort of a thing, then it doesn't end up working. Now, most people become extremely frustrated with League, or they end up going like mentally insane. And part of this is because their team is frustrating them one way or another. But an even larger part of this is because they have made mistakes but have not actually actualized on those mistakes themselves. And I think this is actually a very, very big part of it. In fact, this is probably the biggest part of it. And it's actualizing the fact and being self-aware that you have made mistakes and that you can improve them. And not only can you improve them, you have to retrain your brain to basically correct them. And it's really, really complicated. It's not actually easy. It's very, very difficult. And the thing is, these mistakes are rampant. And they're not just rampant, by the way, in everyday society. They're rampant in video games, and for that matter, in League of Legends in this case. And for that matter, very high elo as well, all the way up to Masters, I would even say. And even pretty much most of the Masters and even some of the Grandmasters and Challenger players themselves. But these mistakes become much less prevalent and much less obvious at Grandmasters and Challenger. And this is because, in my opinion, this is where some of the smartest people reside. And by the smartest people, I really do mean like some of the smartest people, in my opinion. To be high ranking in League of Legends, or for that matter, some extremely strategic video game, it in most cases will require very high levels of cognitive flexibility, which is probably one of the biggest indicators of intelligence. Because most of these people have managed to overcome their ego in one way or another, in this case, basically some of the Grandmasters and the Challenger players, and they're learning from their mistakes, which the 99% of other people do not, and they cannot do. This is what separates them. So if you want to be the best at whatever it is, it doesn't really matter what it is. You need to overcome your ego, and you have to be willing to learn from your mistakes. Because your competition has learned from their mistakes, and they will continue to surpass you.